Okay, the second message here is called the Antichrist and Apostasy. And this is one of the doctrinal issues of which I've actually gotten myself deeply involved on the whole question of whether in Second Thessalonians 2:3 we have apostasia. Is that a reference to the rapture, or is it a reference to actual apostasy? So we're going to look at that today in this hour. And really what it comes down to is we've got nearly 2,000 years of history, 1900 at least, where apostasia in that verse was understood by everybody in the church to be rebellion or apostasy. Then in 1895, a man presented a theory that he thought it could be a physical departure, which would then refer to the rapture. So that's a relatively newcomer. Now, that it's new doesn't mean it's wrong, but it should cause us to at least pause and do some investigation on the subject. Now, I'm not going to go through this entire controversy today because it'd take about 3 hour-long slots, but we're going to focus on one point in particular which Pastor Brett asked me to address, and that is how the Antichrist's life and ministry actually fulfill the concept of the apostasy. So we're going to do 3 sections in this message. The first section is we're going to look at some common arguments that are presented by folks who say the apostasia in that verse can't refer to the rapture. We're going to look at those reasons they give, and we're going to see that they don't have a lot of substance to them. The second thing we're going to look at is instances of apostasia in the Koine era in the Jewish literature that use apostasia in a way similar to the Antichrist. And then we're going to look at the fact, the third point, we're going to look at material that shows that the Antichrist fits the historical pattern for apostasy. And we're going to look at why he deserves to be called the apostasy. So, let's move into this. There's 3 common arguments given why people say apostasia can't be a reference to apostasy. Here's the first one. Now we're going to just revert back to 6th grade for a minute and think about your grammar rules. And you got nouns and you have definite articles and indefinite articles, okay? That's where we're at. We're going to go down to that level. Now they point out that in in fact, let me read 2 Thessalonians 2:3, so make sure we're not losing anybody here. 2 Thessalonians 2:3. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day is not here, unless the falling away comes first, and the man of sin be revealed. So no matter how you translate that noun there, whether you translate it the falling away or the departure, it has a definite article. And that definite article is not just there in the English, it is there in the Greek. So we have to do something with it, don't we? We can't just ignore it and pretend it's not there. So, once we have that in mind, the argument says this apostasia here has the definite article. Therefore, it has to be talking about a definite event at a definite time. And this is true. It's in this context, it's definitely talking about a definite event. It's not a generic. It's not a mere concept. It's talking about a definite thing that happens at a definite time. Now, here's the second part. They say, okay, so it has to be a definite event at a definite time. But apostasy, well, that's just a slow degradation of faith over time, right? You just slowly go downhill over the decades and the centuries. Therefore, this can't be apostasy here. Here's the problem. That's not correct. I mean, it sounds good, but it's not correct. It's begging the question. It's framing a definition of apostasy that's just framed just perfect so that you can win the argument. Right? In English, we don't use apostasy in that limited way. In English, you look it up in a dictionary, it's got 5 or 6 different uses, and it's all over the map. They're all apostasy. But it's not limited to a slow breakdown of faith over a long period of time. The second thing is, when you look at how apostasia was used in Koine Greek for the 300 years prior to the time that Paul penned Second Thessalonians, what you're going to notice is it was always used for political rebellion or religious apostasy that had a definite inflection point at a definite time over a definite issue. If you had a dissension in the Roman army between the soldiers and most of the officers against the general, it was a definite instigator that brought up a definite division, and they had a definite reason they were mad and a definite reason they divided. If you had a division in a political party in the Roman Empire, there was a definite instigator or a definite group of instigators at a definite time with a definite issue. So this is how Greek apostasy is used. It's a definite departure at a definite time with a definite issue and a definite instigator. There is no, in Greek, you don't see this slow degradation over time. Not that that doesn't exist, but they use other terms other than apostasia for that. Now here's another argument they give. Well, brother, there's always been apostasy in the church. There's always been here. You can't find a century in the church that doesn't have apostasy. So how are you going to have an apostasy in the last days that's different than all these other apostasies? How is it going to stand out? And this thing's called the apostasy. What do you do with that? Well, I got 2 things I do with that. First of all, why do we keep talking about the church here? If you look in the context is not the church age. The context is the 70th week in the Antichrist. We're talking about Israel and the tribulation saints, not the church. So it doesn't matter what you think the apostasy in the church is going to look like or not look like. That doesn't even belong in the equation. We're looking for something in the 70th week. The second thing is, it's real easy to find an apostasy in the last days that involves a definite departure at a definite time led by a definite man. We know him as the Antichrist. So the third argument that you hear is, but brother, apostasy means you once held truth and then you left the truth that you held. So you're talking about an apostasy that affects this dead, empty church and affects the world as a whole and affects all these Jews that didn't believe anyway. And how can they apostatize? They never held the truth. Here again, we're right back to framing a definition of apostasy, framing it intentionally in some way so that you can win the argument. That definition is way too narrow. There's nothing in the use of the word apostasy in English or Greek that says you had to have personally held and embraced the truth. And if you didn't, then you can't apostatize. That's way too narrow. The English use of apostasy is way broader than that. And the Greek use of apostasy is way, way broader than that. Apostasia in Greek and apostasy in English is simply the full and final rejection of the light, or the full and final rejection of truth, regardless of whether you were actively religious or modestly religious, or barely religious, or irreligious. Doesn't matter. If you turned your back permanently and finally on the light and walked away, that's apostasy. Doesn't matter how much you held or how tightly you held. And this is true whether you were giving lip service to true religion or whether you were embracing false religion. It doesn't matter whether you held the truth tightly or lightly or not at all. It doesn't matter whether you were apparently sincere or whether you were obviously a hypocrite. That is not in the question at all. The only thing in the question is, did you come to a point in your life where you quit merely pushing light off till tomorrow? Because you know how a lot of people respond to the gospel. Next year, next week, next month, not today, someday. And they quit doing that, and they come to a point where they intentionally and permanently turn their back on the light, and they go away. They're not just skirting around it, they're moving away permanently. That is apostasy. And just for a point of reference here, in the last days when the Antichrist forces his treaty on Israel, according to Daniel 9:27, it's a unilateral treaty forced by one man upon the many, and you can guarantee that in that covenant or in that treaty, whatever you want to translate that as, there will be required a renunciation of Jesus of Nazareth as the Messiah and an embracing of this knothead from hell as the Messiah. That will be in there. That is apostasy, folks. We're going to go deeper into that in a moment. I want to point out here, we just looked at 3 arguments that are used to say why apostasy can't mean apostasy. And we saw that there wasn't a lot of substance in them. This brings up a little rabbit trail here on the spirit of error. This is a great example of the spirit of error. Now, this is how you tell you're dealing with the spirit of error. If someone, let's just say someone's trying to prove pre-wrath rapture to you, and they put up this argument here, and you give them some good reasons why that can't be what they're saying. Instead of surrendering to the light, they jump to the next point. And so then you answer those points, and they will not surrender. They just jump to the next point. And they just keep going around and around in the circle of error, never surrendering to light on any point. And pretty soon they're right back to where they started. I call this the hamster wheel of error. They just keep going around and around and around. Now, they won't surrender to historical facts. They won't surrender to grammatical facts. They won't surrender to exegetical facts or contextual facts or theological facts or biblical facts. They just won't surrender. Rather than surrendering, they just run to the next point. Error always works this way. Now, here's the difference. If a person is moved by the Spirit of truth and they happen to hold an error, when you come to that first point and you show them that point's not true, they might struggle to wrestle a little bit, but they'll say, you know what? You're right. This point's not wrong. Then they'll go to the next one and you'll deal with them on the next point. And ultimately they're going to surrender. So now they're down 2 arguments. And pretty soon they come all the way around that wheel until their last argument's destroyed, and then they embrace the truth. That's the difference between the spirit of error and the spirit of truth. The spirit of error is wired to never surrender. The issue is not truth, the issue is truth. You notice how I put it in quotation marks? The truth is more important than truth. But if you got the spirit of truth, truth is more important than truth. And this is why, as a young believer, I argued ferociously against the pre-trib rapture. I couldn't believe that people were such a bunch of stupid knotheads. How could you believe in a pre-trib rapture? Right there in Matthew 24, they're saints in the tribulation. As if that was actually proof the church is in the tribulation. But anyway, after a while, patient brothers destroyed my little hamster wheel, one rung at a time, until I surrendered the entire hamster wheel and embraced the truth of the pre-trib rapture. All right. I find that this spirit of error is what we're dealing with when we deal with some of the people that are really hard pushing the theory that apostasia is the rapture. Because they'll give you their arguments, like they'll say, all the early English versions have the translation, departure. And you can present them a whole boatload of proof that that's not true. And they won't surrender. They just run to the next point. They can say, oh, but departure in those versions meant physical departure. And you can present to them from the Middle English dictionaries that at that time, the English word departure did not mean physical departure like we use it today. It meant division or dissension. And they won't surrender. They'll just run to the next point. And they'll say, oh, the King James Version is the first one to introduce the falling away rendering. And you show them, no, it was in the Bishop's Bible in 1568, and Martin Luther had it in his version in 1528. And you just go back and, oh, they won't surrender. They just keep going. So we want to be careful when we're dealing with doctrinal issues that we manifest a spirit of truth and not a spirit of error. If you're in a controversy with somebody and you're going over a cup of coffee or over dinner or you're on the sidewalk, wherever you're at, if a point that you just made is exposed to not be right, what do you have to lose in surrendering the point? Well, maybe a little pride. What's the worst thing that can happen? You're wrong in the big picture. What's most likely to be the truth? You have to modify your position a little bit because this one point's not true. You know, once you understand that you will fail your way to truth, it's much easier to surrender. If you can't be wrong, you will never be right. If you embrace the spirit that I'm probably wrong in a lot of things, but I'm willing to be corrected, then you will find your way to the truth. And it's just a blessing to learn this. Anyway, that's enough of the rabbit trail. Let's move on to the rest of this message. Let's look at how the Greek word apostasia was used in the 3 centuries prior to the time that Paul wrote Second Thessalonians chapter 2. So we're going to look at 3 passages. I'm not going to actually walk you through them. If I had the slides made for this, I would put them up on the slide and you could walk through. But I'll just tell you where the passage is, and then you can find it yourself if you're interested, or you can watch one of my online presentations that actually gives some of these. But the first instance is from the book of Jubilees. Now, the book of Jubilees was a book that all religious Jews were aware of, and most religious Jews had read it. It was part of their literature. It was like if you're an American and you haven't read Tom Sawyer, you're probably not American. All right? So in the days of the testimony of Shem, of course, we had Shem, Ham, and Japheth were the sons of Noah. They were on the ark. After the flood and the ship landed on earth, Shem, Ham, and Japheth lived for a long time. Shem was the testimony of God. He was one of the spearheads for the testimony of God. In his day, many men followed Nimrod in the Tower of Babel project, and those that did were guilty of apostasy, according to the book of Jubilees. They were guilty of apostasy. It didn't matter whether they had fully embraced the teachings of Shem and all the other godly, or whether they kind of loosely embraced them, or whether they were kind of standoffish, or whether they never embraced them. Once they embraced Nimrod's open, public fist shaking at God and followed him, that was a public repudiation of the true God in heaven. That is apostasy. That's what the Greeks meant by apostasy. That's how they used the Greek word apostasia. Was open, public rejection of something that should have been accepted. Now, you notice here, we got a definite time. It's the days of Nimrod. We have a definite ringleader. It was Nimrod. We have a definite event. The whole rebellion focused on the Tower of Babel. And by the way, if you've noticed some of the apocalyptic movies and some of the apocalyptic literature and some of the wealthy people, they're going after building arks where they can survive, right? Not a boat ark, but they got their arks. They might buy an old Minuteman missile silo and stock it up to last 1,000 years. And so building the Tower of Babel was the ancient equivalent of this modern ark building. Let God bring another judgment. We're ready this time. We'll just build a tower so big that God can't flood enough water on earth to cover it. That's what they were thinking. No matter what God sends down here, my Minuteman missile silo with $2 billion worth of improvements, there's no way God can take me out. I remember hearing that once. Not even God could sink this ship. Right? Well, in the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, men were guilty of apostasy when they bowed to the statue or image of Zeus, regardless of whether they tightly, loosely, distantly embraced the Jewish religion. If they bowed to the idol of Zeus, they were guilty of apostasy against the true God in heaven. We read about this account in 1 Maccabees chapter 2, this whole thing with Antiochus Epiphanes and the Jews being Hellenized and the Jews worshiping or bowing to the image of Zeus. So here again, we have a definite time in history. We have a definite ringleader, right? Antiochus Epiphanes, and we have a definite event, bowing to the image of Zeus. Here's one more. This one's from the Septuagint. The Septuagint uses the Greek word apostasia 4 times. And one of them is in the days of Ahaz. Ahaz led Israel and Judah down a disastrous path of apostasy. They sacrificed to the gods of Damascus. They cut in pieces the articles that pertain to the worship of God in the house of God. And they made altars all over Jerusalem, altars to pagan gods, and they put high places in every city. Now, a high place didn't necessarily have to be up on top of a mountain, although they sometimes were, but it had to be in a conspicuous place. They could be a high place in a city, a high place on the side of a hill viewing the city, or a high place on top of a mountain. This is in 2 Chronicles 29. So here again, we've got a definite time. We have a definite ringleader, which is Ahaz. We have a definite rejection of revealed truth and a definite embracing of idolatry. This is apostasy. This is what the Jews meant when they used the word apostasy. And it's virtually impossible for a Jew or anyone influenced by Jewish culture to have read what Paul wrote and not have their mind immediately flee to the book of Jubilees and Nimrod, and have their mind immediately flee to 1 Maccabees chapter 2 and Antiochus Epiphanes, and have their mind flee to the uses of apostasy in the Septuagint. It's not even remotely possible. That was how apostasy was used. And so when they read it, that's what they're going to think. Now, if you'll notice, all these places that we just looked at, they were instances that happened at a distinct time at a distinct place with a distinct ringleader and a distinct act of defiance or rejection of the truth. This is an interesting light now cast too on the days of Christ and the Pharisees. In the time of Christ, the Messiah, God manifest in flesh, was walking here on earth. And why were the Pharisees guilty of the unpardonable sin? Because they rejected an atomic bomb worth of explosion of light. And they turned their back on it, and they said, we're going to bow at the idol of dead rabbinical theology. They didn't have a literal idol to bow down to, but they had an idol in their brain that they were bowing down to. And this was, when you reject that much light, this is why it says in Hebrews, it is not possible for those who were once enlightened and had tasted the heavenly gift and tasted the powers of the King come. It's not possible for them to be restored into repentance. Why? They've just permanently and foully and finally rejected the only solution. There is no plan B. And if they've already rejected it, how are they going to go back to it? This isn't a backslider. This isn't someone saying maybe tomorrow or next year. This is someone saying that's filth and I want the darkness. Anyway, think about the light. The Lord Jesus fulfilled over 100 detailed prophecies. Scholars have broken them down into little pieces, and there's over 300 distinct things that were fulfilled. But 100 generic prophecies. He worked miracles nobody had ever worked. So that even pagans were thinking, wow, this has to be God. Never a man spake like him. You had unsaved people that would look at what he was saying, whether they were the servants of the high priests or whether they're Roman soldiers, their jaw just drops off their face. Nobody ever spoke like he spoke. And then they beheld his glory, his moral glory, as well as his physical glory. Some of them got to behold physical glory on the Mount of Transfiguration. So that was apostasy. Now, when we come to the Antichrist situation in the last days, we're going to see that the Antichrist situation fits the definition of apostasy, and more than that, it fits the apostasy. So, let's start with the buildup in the last days. First of all, there is a general apostasy throughout the entire world in the last days. We're already neck deep in this stuff. If it goes much deeper, we're going to be swallowing this garbage. We were hit in the 1700s with rationalism. In the 1800s, we were hit with evolution. We come into the 1900s and people start bringing forth atheistic creation. So now they can be religious and atheists. What a combination, eh? And we have the rise of the spirit of Sodom. We have deeper, blacker darkness right now in the world than has ever been evident in the world. It's more deceptive darkness than ever. So this idea that, how do you tell one apostasy from another? Bro, have you poked your eyeballs out? There's nothing ever like this in history. You had the same degree of evil with Nimrod. You had the same degree of evil at various times in history, but not this diverse, broad, deep explosion of darkness. I mean, Satan can't be any more evil than he is. But the darkness that he perpetrates on earth has gotten deeper, fouler, stronger, more deceptive, more wicked. Now, We've got one world government building prepping the stage for the Antichrist. He doesn't bring it into being when he gets here. Everything's already in place. You're going to have one world economy, largely, if not entirely, set up when he rolls onto the stage. You're going to have one world government ready to rock and roll. And all he's got to do is take the pieces that are prepared and put them together. It's like a 4-piece puzzle instead of a 1,000-piece puzzle. Now, Israel's already a cup of trembling to most of the world. There's only a few nations left that have any kind of a reasonable appreciation of Israel. And even the ones that do, you've got to wonder if it's not largely controlled by their own evil motives. Like they want whoever dominates the Middle East dominates the world, right? And it's a lot easier to work with the relatively stable Israelis than to work with the very unstable Islamic world. Anyway, we won't go there. That's another message. So we've got a broad and deep foundation of apostasy laid in this world. But this brings us to the Antichrist. There's a whole list of definites when we come to the Antichrist. We have a definite leader that leads the world in apostasy. It's the Antichrist. It happens at a definite time. There's a definite 70th week that has a definite start and a definite middle of the week and a definite end. There's a definite event. At Daniel 9:27, Israel is forced unilaterally by the Antichrist into a treaty, which grants them 7 years of peace and permission to rebuild the temple. And at what cost? They have to own him as their Messiah. Now, there's a definite departure. Isaiah 28:18 tells us the character of the covenant that they sign in Daniel 9:27. It is a covenant with death and an agreement with Sheol. When you read this, this implies that in their heart of hearts they know what they're doing. They know it's wrong. But they're being way too pragmatic and way not spiritual enough. This is going to be disastrous for Israel. Thankfully, God is a God of grace. He's not going to just take his big old hand and just flatten Israel and be done with her. He's the God of second chances. And what his magnificent grace has done in the tribulation, 1/3 of Israel is going to be saved, according to Zechariah 13. What a glorious day that will be. Folks, we've never had a revival on planet Earth that saw 1/3 of a nation saved. Ever. We had mighty revivals in America. We had some mighty revivals in England and Scotland and Wales and different parts of the world. But we've never had a revival where 1/3 of the citizens of a nation were born again. That revival right there is the greatest revival in the history of the world. Can you imagine this? In the midst of the greatest apostasy in the history of the world, we have the greatest revival in the history of the world happening. Only God. Only God. Now also we have a definite climax. In the middle of the 70th week, the Antichrist sits in the temple. He shuts down all the sacrifices and temple ceremonies. He exalts himself above all that is called God or that is reverenced. He basically sets all religion aside except for himself and says, I'm God. Now, I don't believe that he's declaring himself to say, I'm Jehovah God up there, because he rejects that concept of God. He's got a different version of God, one that fits with atheistic religion. He's probably going to portray himself as the first ascended master from earth, and he's going to be following some ascended master from another galaxy whose name is Satan, and we know that there's no alien life out there. This is the lying demonic realm pretending to be intelligent life from another galaxy. And this is an interesting little rabbit trail thought here. You ever noticed how some of the stupidest people pretend to be the smartest ones? We do this in the human realm because they do it in the angelic realm. All right. And there's a definite idolatry of the worst kind. You know, when Israel was retrieved from the Babylonian captivity, she was set free from classic idolatry. She never went back to classic idolatry. And yet we read it, I believe it's in Mark, that the house that was swept clean, no, pardon me, it might be in Matthew, the house that was swept clean, the devil that was left comes back, sees it swept clean, gets 7 devils worse than himself. Right? Israel is going to go into 7 times deeper idolatry in the tribulation than she ever went into in the times of Babylon. Israel is going to worship a man as God and is going to worship Satan. This is the absolute depths of depravity and apostasy. So, we've got the introduction of the apostasy, the climax of the apostasy, and the end of the apostasy. We've got a definite perpetrator who has a definite start and a definite end. Anything that anyone wants to have definite about apostasy, you've got it in spades in the last days. So if you want to say, hey, in Second Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3, it says the apostasia, so you need to give us the apostasy. Well, folks, we've got it right here. Now, let's look at a few things here. This definitely qualifies as the apostasy. First of all, it's the antichrist. That is the final end of all the mystery of iniquity for the entire age. If everything that happened with the mystery of iniquity for the last 6,000 years was apostasy, when it comes to a head under the antichrist, that is the apostasy. And he's up against the Christ in a titanic battle. I don't know if you've thought about the 70th week this way, but the 70th week is going to be the greatest hour of spiritual warfare in the history of planet Earth. You are going to have the greatest display of satanic iniquity and darkness and satanic miracles ever in the history of the world. Everything Satan has at his disposal is going to be unloosed in one fell swoop. But it's going to be the greatest display of supernatural miracles on the part of the people of God. You're going to have the Spirit-baptized Jews and Gentiles. They're going to be very same as we had at Pentecost. That's going to be revisited. Pentecost was not anything but the foretaste of the promise of the last days. You're going to have 144,000 witnesses. It doesn't tell us exactly what their ministry is, but they're definitely going to minister. God doesn't appoint people to do nothing. And they are promised they're not going to perish. Well, maybe I shouldn't say God doesn't appoint people to do nothing. Because, you know, in the Catholic Church, they do appoint people to do nothing. Anyway, that's a bad joke. This is going to be a titanic battle. You're going to have the 2 witnesses going head to head with the Antichrist and the false prophet. Nobody is going to have a single excuse for surrendering to the lies of darkness. Because you'll have their miracles are going to be far superseded. Their lies are going to be far superseded by the truth. And here, let me just put this thought in here too. Sometimes people get really nervous. They say, what if people accidentally take the mark of the beast? Folks, no one is ever going to accidentally take the mark of the beast. You're not going to go into a hospital clinic and come out with the mark of the beast and you didn't know it and you don't find out till 3 years later. It just doesn't work that way. The mark of the beast is a public owning of the Antichrist and his system in public repudiation of Jesus of Nazareth and the truth of the Word of God. Nobody will accidentally take this. This is why God has 144,000 out there. It's why he's going to do Pentecost all over again. It's why he's going to have the 2 witnesses. It's why he's going to have literal angels flying around the globe. They're not satellites, folks. These are real angels. This is God making sure that no man has a legitimate excuse. The greatest demonstration of spiritual warfare in the history of the world, the greatest darkness against the greatest light. Oh. In some ways, I kind of wish I was down here, but I'm glad we're going to be watching it on big screen TV in heaven while we're drinking our Heaven Bucks coffee. All right, now here's one more part, and this is going to wrap it up. So we've looked at that we definitely have evidence for not only apostasy in the last days, but the apostasy, right? But now sometimes people will say, well, but brother, how can that apostasia there mean apostasy? There's no apostasy in the context. Now, if I had a big, long Confucius beard, I'd be stroking it right now saying, oh, really? Right? That might be a good reason to grow a beard, bro. All right. Now, the fact is, there is apostasy all over Second Thessalonians chapter 2. So let's look at verse 3. And there we read the line, the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition. Now think about what's going on here. We know from this chapter that the antichrist is not revealed until the restraining effort of God is removed, right? Because the mystery of iniquity is already working except for the final manifestation in the antichrist. God's restraining that. So all the apostasy of the history of the world has come through this mystery of iniquity. The final apostasy, the ultimate apostasy, is going to be revealed when the restraining effort is removed. He's called the man of sin. And the man of sin is going to bring the apostasy. Now, think about this. You have a world prepped for the Antichrist. And when they receive him, they receive the Antichrist, they're rejecting the truth. That's apostasy, folks. That is apostasy. How about this one in verse 4? Who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, demonstrating or proclaiming that he is God. If you've rejected every vestige of light in the world, you yourself, and you're the Antichrist, and call yourself God, that is the greatest act of apostasy a man can do. And if you persuade others to follow you, they are following that apostasy. This is the apostasy. How about verse 11? And for this reason, God will send them a strong delusion that they should believe the lie. Here we got a strong delusion that persuades men to believe the lie contrary to the truth. And the whole world drifts over to the lie. Folks, rejecting the light and the truth in this way, this is apostasy. Again, it doesn't matter how tightly or how lightly you held the thing. Or even if you never embraced it, you just knew it was there. If you turn your back and walk away permanently, finally, and foully, that's apostasy. Verse 10. And with all unrighteous deception among those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth that they might be saved. Again, there's this massive deception. So if you've got deception, you've got people in the fork in the road, you're either going to believe the lies or reject the lies. This is a big fork in the road. And people can wander down the middle, kind of lean in one way or lean in the other way. But ultimately, people are going to be forced to go one way or the other. You either have to really get saved or really go lost. Or we could say, or really go stupid. But that's what's going to happen. That's apostasy. If you turn away from the light, finally and foully, that's apostasy. One more here, verse 12. That they all may be condemned who did not believe the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. Turning from light in a permanent commitment to darkness and unrighteousness. This is apostasy. So you can see apostasy is written all over this context. You couldn't get more apostasy there if you gave a bunch of kids a bunch of balloons filled with paint and told them to throw them at the wall. There's just a ton of apostasy here. The context clearly manifests apostasy under the Antichrist. Now, there's one more thought in here before we conclude. I've read every early church father that had either wrote in Greek or has translations available in Greek from the early translations. Many of them handled this passage. None of them that handled this passage ever opposed the physical departure theory or taught it or mentioned it. Now, this is pretty interesting when you consider that these guys fought over just about every point under the sun, right? The only positions that they had were down the paths of rebellion, like political rebellion, or religious rebellion, religious apostasy. Those are the only two views. Most were on the path of religious apostasy. And some of them saw this link between the apostasy and the Antichrist is so tight that they actually called the Antichrist the apostasy. That was one of his names. He was the apostasy. All of them regarded the apostasy and the Antichrist as inseparable. You saw the one, you saw the other. They went together. You saw the apostasy that implied the Antichrist. You saw the Antichrist that implied the apostasy. Those two things were inseparable. So in conclusion here, we saw that some men have begged the question by framing contrived definitions of apostasy that forced the question to be answered the way they want it to be answered. And we saw that a lot of these men are actually ignoring a trainload of information that would say they're not right. And we looked at this whole thing, the difference between the spirit of error and the spirit of truth. And we looked at the historical usage of apostasia, especially as it regards the Jewish literature. And we saw that apostasia involves a definite act of departure at a definite time in a definite location with a definite instigator. We took this principle, we go to the last days, and we see what do we have with the Antichrist? A definite departure at a definite time with a definite instigator. And this is going to be the culmination of the mystery of iniquity. So it's going to be the greatest apostasy of all the apostasies in the history of the world. It definitely deserves the title, the apostasy. So that, we're done here. Folks, just keep your eyes on Jesus. Keep your eyes on the prize in the skies.